Okay, let's move into mold toxins. Now, we've said this before, but I'm going to kind of summarize it again. So mycotoxins, VOCs, hyphal and dead mold spores are all parts of mold or offshoots of mold that can drive a toxic effect in the body. They all drive chronic inflammatory reactions. One of the things we know about mycotoxins is they suppress DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We know that they're fat soluble, and this is going to be important as you're thinking about your detox because they store in fatty tissues like the nervous system and your fat cells and muscles, the striatal, skeletal muscles. They do store in muscle fat. So it's important to understand that. They're metabolized by the liver, and we're going to go into the depth of that and what vitamins and minerals are important for detox through your liver. They're excreted from the body through sweat, urine, and stool. And part of that is with bile, so it comes out with bile. And it can become trapped in the body as well by bile, and we'll talk about that. And detox is definitely required. So when we think about, when people say, I want to do a mold detox, this is what we're really referring to. We're referring to detoxifying or removing and eliminating the mold toxins, VOCs, hyphal fragments, dead mold spores that accumulated in our body as a result of environmental mold exposure over time and that are driving chronic inflammation. We need to detox these things out of the body. Now, mold allergy, going back to mold allergy, we don't need to detox, we just need to remove ourselves from the environment and the immune system will calm down. And then mold colonization is where you're so immunocompromised that the mold starts growing on you and in you, and that mold growing on you and in you produces toxins that also have to be detoxed. So take all of this in context, very important so that you understand what you're doing when you're attempting a detox, but also so if you're working with a doctor, you can understand how to ask the right questions and how to have an engaging conversation so that you can win. Because at the end of the day, you're not in this for the fun of it, you're in this to get rid of it so that you can get your health back and restore your life. Let's look at mycotoxin exposure. I want to kind of draw a little bit of attention to this because if you understand what mycotoxin exposure causes, it's going to make more sense as you're going through your detox, especially if you're suffering from some of the symptoms of what we call detox response or Herxheimer response. But these are some of the main pathways of how mycotoxins can damage the body. So over here we have mycotoxin disruption. Remember I said earlier that mold toxins act like antibiotics, and so they can wipe out good bacteria and flora. And unfortunately, that leads to a number of different problems. One of the problems it's going to contribute to is nutritional deficiencies. A lot of your vitamins are made by your healthy microbes that live in your gut, especially B vitamins. And so things like B vitamins, as well as a compound called butyrate. And why is that important? The B vitamins play a major role in detoxification. Butyrate preserves and protects the liver from the debris, from the toxin debris that can leak across your gut, because this is one of the other things that happens here. Mycotoxins cause leaky gut. And if you don't have adequate butyrate, you're basically, the contents of your gut leak into your bloodstream. But first, that part of the bloodstream is called the portal circulation. They go to the liver, and they put tremendous pressure on the liver. And so as they're damaging the liver, how do we detox? We have to detox through the liver, and we're going to talk about how that works in just a minute. But I want you to understand, this is why it's so hard, because when you're being exposed, your very detox systems are being damaged by the exposure. So even when you get out of the mold, sometimes your organs aren't up to speed, they're not up to par, they're barely keeping you afloat. And so sometimes you have to pace detoxification to your level of tolerance, because if you push too hard with organs that are, let's just say, under the weather, you're gonna feel terribly. So Mycotoxins directly can cause leaky gut. They can cause leaky gut indirectly through microbiome disruption. Of course, leaky gut also leads to nutritional deficiencies, but it also causes, this is one of the hallmark problems of people that fail to recover once they get out of the mold, because leaky gut contributes to an increased food and chemical sensitivity. This is why so many people that are in mold develop multiple chemical sensitivities and multiple food reactions. And they get narrowed down to 1 or 2 or 3 foods that they can eat without feeling horribly. This is one of the mechanisms as to why. Now, mycotoxins can also cause an immune hypersensitivity, which is also something that contributes. So you got multiple ways we're getting to the same thing here, right? So this hypersensitivity puts your immune system on hyper alert. You've got foods that are leaking across the GI tract barrier. The immune system is overreacting, so it's looking at those foods and it's saying, how did these food proteins get here? We don't like them. We're angry. Let's attack that food. And so this is what hypersensitivity does. And so people become more and more reactive to foods and chemicals. I've had several patients over the years, they can't go out in public, they can't go to church because there may be some other parishioners wearing perfumes or colognes, and it just hammers them to such a great degree because of chemical sensitivities. I've seen cases too where people really struggle and they go on diets that are really restrictive, and one of the more common ones that you're seeing now come out of kind of popularism is the carnivore diet, and it's because many of these people that are going carnivore and feeling a lot better, they're in mold and they don't know it. But their solution to it was diet change of a sort. And so they've eliminated a lot of the foods that were causing reactivity, sensitivity, and allergy reactions. So they've reduced their inflammatory burden by restricting their diet tremendously to just meat. But this is a common consequence of chronic mycotoxin exposure. We also know mycotoxins can drive oxidative damage. The chemicals themselves damage your cells and your organelles within your cells, and that oxidative damage is a cause of chronic inflammation, which subsequently contributes to the development of autoimmunities, and autoimmunities ultimately lead to cancers. We know several mycotoxins are already classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as carcinogens. And so mycotoxins, oxidative damage, inflammation, autoimmunity, and cancer. We know that some mycotoxins disrupt hormones, and they do so through multiple mechanisms. And hormone disruption, because there's a lot of different hormones, but one of the types of mycotoxins called Zearalenone is an estrogen mimicking toxin. So it increases the activity of estrogen-like effects in the body. Hang on to that because we're going to talk more about it in just a minute. But we also know other hormones become disrupted. Hormones like cortisol and DHEA and thyroid hormone. We know that mycotoxins hit the pituitary gland in the brain and will disrupt the regulatory hormones that are largely in charge of your endocrine system. And so hormones like ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, antidiuretic hormone, melanocyte stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, etc. So the damage to the pituitary gland, the neurological damage caused by mycotoxins can really disrupt your endocrine function. This is why many people in mold have just a complete endocrine nightmare of a health issue going on. We know that mold toxins also inhibit DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis, and what this does, so here we have all this oxidative damage causing all this inflammation to tissues, but we have inhibition of DNA and RNA and protein, and now we have all that inflammation can't heal. Because this ultimately what this leads to is the body's inability to heal efficiently, what we would call a repair deficit. So all of this can happen as a result of mycotoxin exposure when we're not healing as effectively that also being caused by this over here, this nutritional deficiencies, can lead to slow or reduced healing. Nutritional deficiencies can also affect hormones. Nutritional deficiencies can affect our ability to do DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis. So you notice that we could draw a lot of arrows through here. There's so much interconnectivity between the damage that mycotoxins do and the body and the outcomes and the consequences. And this is why there's no one-size-fits-all approach in this regard. Now, I mentioned that I wanted to talk a little bit more about Zea. Zea is a mold toxin produced by Fusarium molds, and so what we'll see a lot of times is that a hyperestrogenic activity. So the estrogen mimicking mold toxin is what we're dealing with here. And this particular mold toxin for women can create estrogen dominance symptoms, so irregular heavy periods, worsening PMS, breast tenderness, fibrocystic lumps, and increased breast density. And this, oftentimes gets misdiagnosed as cancer or precancer. You go through all these mammograms and all that stress, when in fact, it could just be mold exposure creating these types of symptoms leading to that diagnosis. For men, we get erectile dysfunction. So guys, if you're struggling in that department, if you've got fatty breast tissue growing on your pectorals, this happened to me when I was in mold. I started to develop gynecomastia because one of my highest levels of mold toxins was in this category. And then we got muscle loss and weight gain, mood swings, anxiety, depression, irritability, persistent tiredness, low energy levels. These are all consequences of exposure to just this one. And I'm picking on this particular one, not for any reason other than I'm just trying to share more with you, but I also wanted to bring a couple of things up, because this is one of those mycotoxins that you can get exposure through the environment, but you can also get a lot of the exposure through food. And as you can see here, Zearalenone is an estrogenic mycotoxin, common food contaminant, and has been implicated in increasing the incidence of carcinogenesis, so increases cancer development and other reproductive health ailments through the estrogen receptor pathway. Now, I also sometimes wonder how many people in mold who have tendencies towards gender confusion are maybe being over inundated with this chemical estrogen. Nobody's done any great research on it yet, but I have to speculate with the quantity of people who really are struggling. You can see here, one of the things I want to point out is the use of flavonoids in the inhibition of the toxicity of this particular mycotoxin. The flavonoid that I have seen, this is just a little side pearl for you, is quercetin, because it blocks that pathway. It blocks that ERA, that estrogen receptor alpha pathway. So it has the potential to reduce the toxicity of estrogen dominance in people that are dealing with this. Now, one of the other things we know about estrogen dominance, one of the reasons why women are more allergic than men, it has to do with estrogen. Estrogen increases the release of histamine from mast cells. It actually shifts the immune system in favor of that avenue. So, as I was mentioning earlier with mast cells, I said quercetin plus vitamin C to help stabilize those mast cells. Well, this is one of those intrinsic mechanisms, and so just shining a little light on that chemistry for you. One of the things I also want to point out is this was a study done in the US on maternal and placental mycoestrogen concentration. So how many babies and mamas' placentas had high levels of Zea or mycoestrogen. So they detected these estrogen compounds in 7% of urine samples of pregnant women and 84% of placentas. So very high quantities. And what they found is that consumption of ultra-processed foods, added sugars, and refined grains were linked to higher Zea concentrations while healthier diets were associated with lower levels. So keep that in mind. Keep that in the back of your mind as we start talking about detoxification, because this is another area where people fail. When they try to detox, they're eating the wrong foods, and they're eating foods that have mycotoxins in them, and so they're less successful. Hey, if you want to see the full show, the full breakdown on mold detoxification, check out my comprehensive crash course right here.